Good afternoon and welcome to the first ever virtual Death Doula podcast. I'm so happy to have you here with me where we can just dive into that topic that is so uncomfortable for people to talk about: death, dying, grief, and all that stuff in between. I'd like to start out this podcast with asking you to go on a vision journey with me for a moment. This is not a real journey. So we're just going to go on a pretend journey, which is kind of the way that I like to explain to people why I do what I do. So back in time, you suddenly found out that you were pregnant, but everybody said to you, don't talk about it. It makes me feel uncomfortable. And you say, but my body's going to change. Everything's going to change in my world. And I don't know what's happening to me. And they said, don't talk about it. It makes us uncomfortable. So for 9 months of your pregnancy, you have to watch your body change. You're scared about what's going to happen. All kinds of things are happening. And when you ask the doctor, how is this baby going to come out? He says, don't worry, we're not there yet. You ask your friends who've experienced before, can we talk about this? And they say, oh no, don't talk about it. It's uncomfortable. It makes me feel weird. Now that story isn't real. But do you know, in our society, that's what we do to people who are dying. Because they are dying and we feel uncomfortable with that, we inadvertently tell them, I'm too uncomfortable to talk about this, so can you just not do it around me? Can you just not talk about it? I meet up with clients all the time that all they want to do is talk about it, but they have no space to say how they feel. They don't want to talk to their family and friends about death and dying because they know it makes them cry. It makes them sad. And yes, I'll be the first one to tell you, death and dying is sad. It's going to be. There's no way to take that away. It's part of it. But it can also be beautiful. It can also be a safe space. It can also be a place where you make beautiful memories together. And that's the reason I want to have this podcast. That's the reason that I want to speak about death and dying, because too many people are dying alone, are dying without their questions answered, because we live in a culture that hides death and dying. We talk about everything else. We talk about family planning. We talk about saving for retirement. We talk about job responsibilities. But 100% of us in this world are going to die. But yet we never speak of it. We keep it something hidden until it happens. And then, whoa, the whole world crashes in because we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how we're supposed to behave. We don't know how we're supposed to act. We don't know what we can say, what we can't say, because everybody is too uncomfortable talking about death and dying. So for today, I want us not to be uncomfortable. I want to talk about why we're afraid to talk about it. What made you come to a group like this? What made it call out to you? What questions may you have that you want to have answers for? And I'm not going to tell you right off the hop that I have all the answers, because some questions that come from death and dying, there are no answers to. Some things, it's a journey of figuring it out. And that's okay. That's okay. The reason that I do what I do is because I think we need to change the way our world is, and people need to be able to speak freely about this topic, because the more that we take things out of the darkness and bring them into the light, the less scary they are. Have you ever thought back about something else that you were so frightened of? You imagined it in your head to be this horrible experience. And then when it really happened, It wasn't that horrible. And sometimes that's what it's like with death. We think it's going to be a horrible experience, but sometimes it's beautiful. Sometimes magical things happen at the bedside of somebody who's dying that we miss if we don't want to be there or if we are too afraid to talk about it. Dying people have a lot to teach us. People ask me all the time, "Oh, Maggie, how can you do what you do?" Do you know the dying people teach me way more than I give them? It teaches me how to live my life, to live from a place of knowing that everything in this world is temporary, all of it. And when you live from that kind of place, you make different choices. I'm not saying better choices, you make different choices. And that's where I encourage you to, as we open up and talk about this, to be open to the opportunity that it may change the way you think about things. It may not change the way you think about things. And that's okay. As I said in the beginning parts of this, when I invited people to come, there's no right or wrong answers. Everything is allowed here. Every conversation is allowed. All that I ask is that we respect each other's differences. And what I believe, you might not believe. What you believe, I might not. And that's okay. So, the first question that I would have for anybody who wants to share is, what made you want to talk about this topic? What brought you here today? What thoughts come to your mind, Rose?
I'd like a better understanding of the entire process. Having been through losing multiple people in my life, I've only had two people that I've actually been bedside with when they passed. And one was just a remarkable experience, and the other one waited till I walked out of the room, which annoyed the heck out of me because I wanted to be there, but apparently he didn't want me to be there. But the whole thing, I know that they talk to loved ones ahead of time, but like in the case with my husband, when he was passing, he would talk to me about the party on the ceiling. And the first time he brought it up, I said, "What?" Because I really wasn't paying attention to to him, I was in another world. And he says, "Well, you're the one that's supposed to know about these things." Well, I didn't hear what he said, but then I eventually figured it out, right? So I missed that whole conversation. And then the next day, he kept telling me about the bird on the lamp. And I had no clue what he was talking about. I had to go back and research that. After I mentioned it to somebody after he'd passed, and they said, "Oh, what kind of bird?" I don't know. I didn't ask. Well, different birds have different meanings. So I don't know. I don't know what that was. I didn't have the smarts to say what kind of bird, but that was part of his process. And I'd like to understand it better so I don't make that mistake again.
Well, and I don't even think that I would call it a mistake, because where you were in that moment is where you were in that moment. It's not a mistake that you forgot or didn't think to ask what kind of bird it is. It was at that moment irrelevant. What it can tell you now is, ask more questions, inquire more about why that bird is there and why do they think the bird is there. I think for every single person that I have been present with who was dying or at death, it's different. People do different things, they say different things, they behave different ways. There's no clear cut journey of how that happened. I can tell you from personal experience, when my mom was dying, she left the earth plane many times over the course of 6 weeks and came back. She left and came back, and she would tell me stories. And We talked about what was happening with her. And I took those things that she told me very serious. I believed that they were happening. And that's where a lot of times people don't believe they're happening. They think that it's medication, and sometimes maybe it is. But for me personally, it's happened way too many times for it just to be medication. I have heard numerous people say that their loved ones come to get them, that people don't cross over by themselves, that their ancestors or other pertinent people in their life will come and get them. Animals come and get them. So quite possibly that bird could have been something that was comforting to your husband and brought him some peace and joy that he knew. Um, it's got a variety of different meanings. And all that I would encourage you in that is, don't look at what you think you did wrong. Look at what you can learn from that and what you would ask now if you were at the bedside of somebody.
Yeah, now I know what questions to ask, what things to pay attention to. I know through my husband's, there were several nights where he'd try to get up out of bed and he couldn't. And he'd be just hell bent to get out of that bed because he had to go. They were calling him,
Yeah.
whatever. And my daughter and I would look at each other and go, okay, if Nick's here to get you, our son said, it's okay, go with Nick. And then later, after he passed, another medium friend of mine said Nick was in the group, but it was his mom at the front of the line. And I
Mhm.
never even considered that any other family member would be there but his son.
Right.
So that was kind of weird. I don't know. Maybe she was
Yeah.
heading up the party on the ceiling. I'm not sure. Although that sounds more like something my son would do. But
And
um,
it is possible. And I say it is possible because I've never been to the other side myself. So, but I think it is possible that when he was saying he's seen the party in the ceiling, maybe the ceiling was the portal.
yeah,
Because I do know from my own experience that because I work with people who are dying, there is a portal between life and earth that opens for them to go through, for them to leave. And people have different ideas of what that means. So maybe that portal was in the ceiling, and that's why he was saying there was a party. Because I personally believe there is a party on the other side when somebody is crossing over, because they're it's like a family reunion for all the people who have gone before.
yeah,
And as I said, some people believe differently, and that's okay too. I'm not here and I don't do this so people will believe what I believe. Lots of times I'll have clients say to me, so what do you believe? And I say, what I believe isn't important. What is important is what you believe. And that's the same thing that I say here. As I share what I believe, it's not as important as what you believe, because your truth is yours, and that's what you take with you on this journey, is what you believe. My purpose in doing this, so people will possibly figure out what they believe, because many people probably don't know what they believe. Because if we're not going to talk about this topic, Sharon's putting her hand up, she's not sure what she believes, and that's okay. Maybe this conversation is just to open up that book of, what do I believe about this? Why am I so afraid to talk about it? Why does it bring so much fear? And for me personally, I believe it brings so much fear because we don't talk about it. Oftentimes, in anything that I'm going through in my life, when fear steps in, it just wants me to meet there. It wants me to meet and allow those emotions and talk about, where's that fear coming from? And oftentimes, when I ask the question, okay, fear, where are you coming from and what do you want from me? I realize it just wants to be heard. And sometimes when we just say those things out loud that we're afraid of, they're not as scary. And you hear that back to yourself and you go, oh, maybe so. I can tell you a story of one client that I had that I used to go and visit him and feed him ice cream. And the whole time I was feeding him ice cream, he would apologize for things. And I listened, I never delved into it. And I took care of that client and fed him ice cream for many, many weeks. And it wasn't until I read in his obituary that he had a daughter named Maggie.
Oh,
So I was receiving an apology because he thought I was her. So all this time that I am going and feeding him his ice cream, he thought I was his daughter. And I get goosebumps even now when I think of it, because I think, how sacred is that? Because one thing about it is, dying people have things they need to say.
I'll open it up.
And it doesn't necessarily matter who they say it to, as long as they're getting to say it. Because maybe that daughter, Maggie, wasn't in a place to feed him ice cream. Maybe she wasn't around. Maybe she wasn't in a place that she could have received the apology that he was giving, but he still needed to give it. And that's one thing that happens when I hold space with people who are dying. I allow them opportunities to say anything that they need to say. They can talk to me about anything, and I will let them. I won't judge them. I won't condemn them. I allow it, because sometimes people who are dying just need to say it. And it isn't so much that the other person needs to hear it, they need to say it. Marcella?
So what I'm, thank you, first of all. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Emotions are allowed. Don't be sorry.
That's kind of what I was going to say is, I understand what happens afterwards. I communicate, I feel, I know. Because of where I am in the journey with Dad right now, the emotions, my emotions are my biggest hurdle, because I need to be there for him.
Mm-hmm. Do you think
And
that you're not allowed to share those emotions with him?
I don't want to put that on him.
But
I don't want.
what if you're not putting that on him? But what if you're sharing a sacred time with him? Like, I remember when my mom was dying, I would hold her hand and we would both cry. She would cry about how much she was going to miss me. I would cry about how much I was going to miss her. And we shared that crying. Why do you feel you don't want to put that on him? Maybe he needs it.
I've never thought of it that way, to be honest. I've always tried to be the support for him, and have the answers that he's looking for. So to go to him and to share that space seems a little foreign, but I also know my father is he's where I get my emotions from. He's he's very much that sensitive guy. So how would you even start? I mean, I go all the time and I sit there with him, and he's in a wheelchair. He's still even though he's receiving palliative, like his care plan is now palliative care plan has been activated.
Mm-hmm.
That just basically means, we're at the tail end,
Right.
and
Yep.
but how do I even have that conversation or even start that level of communication with him? I have no idea.
Well, it's nice that you came here today because now you could use me as your excuse. You could go into the room and you could sit down and take his hand and say, Dad, I went to a meeting with this lady who works with people who are dying. And she told me it's good for us to share our emotions about this. It's good for us to talk about all the things that we're feeling, thinking, scared about. So I'm wondering if you would give me permission to talk to you about that, and if I could give you permission to talk about those things, and that it's okay if we cry. It's okay if we're sad because death is sad and I'm going to miss you. But could we give each other permission to open and honestly talk about our feelings, even if we don't have answers, and acknowledge to him, I don't have answers for all of your questions, but hold his hand and just let him know I'm here for whatever you want to talk about. And I give you permission to say anything.
Okay.
And
That I
that
like.
crying is okay. It's not
That I
only
like.
okay, it's good.
Having those conversations, out of the blue, but knowing, yeah, I think that would be very helpful, to be
And I
honest.
give my clients permission to blame me for that. And because I tell them, you can tell them that Maggie said this is good. And I need to allow these feelings and emotions, and that the world will be a better place if we have these open, honest conversations. And I think probably because you're in that particular part of the journey right now, you would notice as well. Not even doctors want to say to somebody the truth about death and dying. They say, oh, we're not there yet. Well, I know we might not be there yet, but I want to talk about when we do get there.
Right? Um, it's funny, we kind of half joke of all the days to wear makeup. I apologize. Oh my gosh. um, we used to half joke that me being able to speak with spirit, there was a reason, right? And that he always said, like, well, it's because this way you can talk to me after I'm gone. And I thought, oh, good Lord, you talk now. I get my talking from you. I can only imagine how much more talking we're going to do when you're on the other side. That's besides the point. But this is probably, for me in this journey, the emotions tied to this are like the biggest, the heaviest that
Mhm.
that
And
I
do
just,
you allow them?
well, I'm learning to. Um, I'm giving myself some time and some space
Mhm.
um to allow this to happen and to occur. And um that in itself is, I'm really, really, really good at like ignoring my emotions and putting everybody else first. I am like an expert at that, but this is about me. And
And
it's
this is not the time to do that.
no,
This is the time to give yourself the love and attention that you would give to other people.
yeah.
And
And
this is the time that you need to allow all those emotions. Now, yes, maybe you don't want to be in the grocery aisle at the grocery store telling a total stranger how emotional you are. Maybe that's not where you want to do it, but it's having a group of people that you can count on, that you could phone up somebody and say, I just need somebody to sit with me because I just want to cry for half an hour. Do that. Sharon's
yeah,
putting her hand up, so she'll
yeah,
do that.
yeah.
So, and that kind of prevents you from it makes it easier to not do it to total strangers in the grocery store.
They get it eventually. They just do. Unfortunately, I live in a really small town, so they're really nice, but they've gotten it as well. So
Yeah. And I will tell you as well, strangers in the grocery store often are okay with that because they are kind and caring when
yeah,
people share their feelings and emotions. The important thing for you to remember when you're on this journey with somebody who's dying is you're allowed to cry.
I have not been allowing myself to do that, in all honesty, and that's been all of these. I think I love the fact that you're doing this because even in the long-term care homes, there's not that same communication. When they
Right.
pulled me aside 2 weeks ago and said, Marcella, Marcy, we're going to have to start talking and implementing palliative care. That was kind of the end of the conversation.
Yeah.
I'm like,
I
well, what is
went and
that?
did a talk at a long term care home and I offered them support and told them all the things that I could do for their families. And I was called in there by somebody on the family council. And so I went in, I did my whole presentation. And then at the end, they said, "Oh, we don't talk about dying here."
No, like
And
not at all.
I looked and I said, "Is anyone leaving a different way?"
It's true though. It's
It's
100%
very
true.
true.
You
And
know,
that's the reason. And God bless them, but nurses don't have time.
yeah,
Nurses have such a busy schedule in long-term
yes,
care or palliative care. They do not have time. They would love to be able to do what I do and just sit with somebody and let them cry it out or let them yell it out or whatever it is. They don't have time for that. So instead, they've kind of adopted the philosophy of this world that says, this is hard, so we're just not going to talk about it. Well, you know what? That doesn't work. It doesn't work because when you put things away and just choose not to talk about them, it doesn't make them go away.
no. It sweeps it under
It's
the rug, right?
it's the
And
same thing if you're talking about childhood sexual abuse. It's uncomfortable for people to talk about,
yeah,
but not talking about it doesn't make it go away. And
no,
you can say all you want to people who are in palliative care, we don't talk about dying here, but they're still gonna die.
they're dying. Like they're dying.
And
It's
it means that they're gonna die without being able to have their questions answered,
yeah.
without being able to have their
Okay.
concerns talked about.
Okay.
And that makes it so much more scary for them.
I didn't even think of the other side of the coin. I have been so focused on my emotions and like the fact that dad is more out than in at this point, but he still has those emotions that he's dealing with and the questions potentially. And thank you, Maggie. You've given me some tools, a very useful tool,
Good.
and I'm
I can
grateful.
tell you, and as I say to all of my clients, I can only speak from my own personal experience. I know my mother's greatest fear when she was dying was not her dying, was not what it was going to be like afterwards. Her greatest fear was whether or not I was going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she used to talk to me about that. And she used to ask every single person who came to visit her to take care of me. The dying have their own concerns. And most of the time, it's not about them.
They've kind of made peace with it at that point, I can imagine, right? It's just
Yes.
us left behind that are still trying to.
And it
Okay.
depends on how old they are. It depends on the circumstance of their life. It depends on what kind of disease maybe is taking their life. But oftentimes, by the time people, for example, with cancer are dying, they're done.
Yeah.
They're done living with cancer. And a lot of the times, they've reconciled the fact I'm done now. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want any more treatment. I don't want to be poked. I don't want to be prodded. I just want to be done.
Yeah.
And the same thing, you see that a lot with older people. When older people, they feel, I've lived my life. I've had a good life, but they don't want to leave their loved ones.
Yeah.
They still have that uncertainty of, are you going to be okay? And when am I going to see you again? There's so many questions that dying people have, and they're as individual as the dying person.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
As much as I'd love to stay for the whole, I got an exit stage left, but thank you, Maggie.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any question, comment, anything that they would like to add to our conversation before we bring this to an end?
I just, just like everybody, and when I see the C word, I get really, really angry because it's what's wiped out most of my family. And whenever I was a baby or a little girl, or even as an adult navigating my journey, my mom would always say, "Don't cry." She would always try to stop me from crying and feeling. And it just led me to a place where I just feel like I'm a constant blubbering mess. And then I feel guilty for crying. And I feel bad for crying because if I show my emotions, that means that somebody's going to feel bad for me, then I'm upset. So you lock it up and you try to be strong for the both of you. And there's just such huge dysregulation in my nervous system. And this is for me, Maggie, just such divine timing because my dad has just been, he's the only boy left now in the family. And he's been so sentimental and he's scared and he doesn't believe in anything. And I've had so many different experiences with connecting with spirit that I try to seed plant every now and then. I'm just like, okay, who is it that I'm really trying to convince here?
Yeah.
And he tells me, he's not going to be the one that's going to be in the bed suffering that, he's made up his mind that he would take his own life. And he said, "I don't want you to be mad at me." And I'm like, you might have like so many years, but what about if it's tomorrow? Like, how am I going to focus and deal with my emotions around it?
What about if you only need to be concerned with your emotions for yourself instead of being concerned of how your emotions make other people feel? Because how other people feel about you having emotions or showing your emotions, quite frankly, is none of your business. How they feel about it is their problem. I always ask the question, is that a me problem or is that a them problem? And if somebody can't handle you sharing your emotions, that's a them problem. That's not a you problem.
Right.
And I would suggest to you that probably the reason they have difficulty with you showing your emotions is because they don't know how to show theirs either. And especially if it's people who have been taught their whole life not to show any emotions, there are certain times that you have emotions. And death and dying is an emotional roller coaster. Grief, an emotional roller coaster. So, what I would offer to you is care less about how they feel about you sharing your emotions or experiencing your emotions, and care more about how you feel about it. And you recognizing that it's important for you to have a safe place to be able to do that is a good thing. And if they want to go out the rest of their life in not sharing emotions, that's not your problem. But you choose a different route for you. And even, for example, with your father, when you guys have different views on it, that's okay. You're allowed to have different views about end of life. You're allowed, just like you have different views about life. But to have open, honest conversations about it is making the whole thing easier, makes it something that you are free to have conversations about. And one conversation that you might want to talk to him about, and again, you can blame Maggie, the death doula, is he wouldn't have to take his own life. There is something now in our country called MAID, that is medical assistance in death. People get to choose the kind of death that they want to have. And whether other people agree with it or disagree with it, irrelevant. So those are different ways that you can open up conversations, and you will see the emotions differently when you allow them, and when you don't give others responsibility for your emotions. You're allowed your emotions, and other people don't have to like it. What it causes them to feel is not your responsibility either. Because I think the reason we have this problem in our society is because nobody wants to feel anything about death and dying, but we do.
Yes. And I felt like the more that I focused on it, the more I thought that I shouldn't be. And it was sad and it was morbid. Um, but when I connect with people on the other side, like all I feel is elatement and joy. And it was just like today, um, I was just like, honestly, I picked up this book. It's called Accepting Death, Embracing Life. And I feel that this is where feeling stuck and then in this like functioning freeze because I want to move forward in life with a purpose, but I haven't dealt with my emotions and my fear around death.
Mhm.
So I'm just very grateful for this space.
Thank you. The one thing that as I said earlier too, is I have learned how to live my life because I work with people who are dying. I tell all of my clients, and I encourage my clients, I'm not morbid in any way whatsoever. I tell people to live fully until you're no longer living. So all of my clients, even the ones who do have a life altering, debilitating disease that is going to take their life, even those people, I tell them every single day when you wake up and you're alive, live. Live until you're not living anymore, because then you get to live differently. But for us who are here, if you deal with this topic of death and dying and grief, and when I talk about it to young people, when I talk about it with older people, I say, talk about it, feel it, deal with it, and then live your life. Because I hate to break it to you, just because we talk about death and dying doesn't make people die. Nobody dies 1 second before they're supposed to die. It's just the way it is. 100% of us are going to die. So why don't we face that demon, as we call it, put the myths to bed, and live our life
There's
freely,
such a
open to have conversations.
yes, I just feel like there's such a stigma around death and like all of the, like you said, like the how society views it and everything. It's just like, okay, I'm going to start calling it transitioning. We're not dying, we're transitioning. But it's the energy that we gave it, and I gave it my power away with the fear around it.
Yes.
And I just need that to leave my body.
And see, this is why when I became a death doula, there's many people who do what I do, who call themselves end of life doulas, transition coaches. And people would say to me all the time, well, why are you calling yourself a death doula? Because that's kind of morbid. And I said, I call myself a death doula purposely because we need to change the connotation that comes with the word death. We need to
I
make
love
it
that.
not a bad thing. We don't shame people for being pregnant. Like I said in the beginning of our
Yeah.
chat, we don't shame people for being pregnant, and we don't think pregnancy is a bad word? Why do we think death is a bad word? Why do we think it's a morbid word? Why do we think it's a heavy word? Just because society says so? Why? 100% of us are going to do it. Is there anything else in this world that 100% of us are going to do? And yet we don't talk about it. I think, and that's the reason I kept the term death doula, and I say the word death all the time, because I don't think it should be a bad thing.
Yeah.
Death is
Agreed.
the same as life. It's just at a different end. And if you look at it in the same way as a birthing doula helps somebody come into this world, as you hear of somebody who's giving birth to a baby, look at death in the same way. One is coming into this world and one is leaving this world. And it's okay. And just breathe. And when you feel the fear compounding in on you, Sharon, I would ask you, what are you afraid of?
That it won't be accepted.
What if? What if it isn't? But what if it is? It's okay if other people don't accept you. We look at that in many areas of our life. It's okay to be authentically you and to be comfortable around this topic. I'm not saying it's a picnic. I'm not saying you're never going to have emotions about it. And just because you don't fear it doesn't mean that you look forward to it. It's not one or the other. It's the same thing as I'll say to people, did you know that you can carry two things at the same time? You can hold happy and you can hold sad at the same time. But somehow we think that we can't.
Yeah.
But the reality is, people give birth to brand new babies, filling this world full of light and love at the same time that somebody else leaves this world. We can hold more than one container at one time. And that's where, in doing these talks, I invite people to not be afraid of holding those containers. Just hold them, feel them. Don't just throw them away and pretend that we don't have them.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? I will have a variety of different conversations, and I was thinking for these podcasts, I will have maybe some of them in the afternoon like this, or what I tried to be afternoon, but for Rose, it's morning. And some of them will be in the evening. So I guess those ones will be in the afternoon for Rose, and kind of mix it up so that other people can come at different times, because there's probably a lot of people who couldn't come today because it is in the day and it's part of the work week. So continue to share in our group if there's any times that work better for you, if there's topics you want to discuss, that type of thing, because I'm open to all of that. I want this to be a safe place where we can share our feelings, our thoughts, our emotions, all of it.
So appreciated.
You're very welcome. So for today, let's just take a breath. I want to thank you all for coming and for joining me on this first podcast. And I hope it's been somewhat of an easy conversation to have, and I hope you feel safe And if you have any comments, questions, or anything, just reach out to me either through the group or privately on Messenger. I'd be happy to speak with anybody. And if anything comes up in your life because of this podcast, please reach out. I don't want you to ever feel alone, because we are not alone. We are here together in this safe space to talk about this. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for joining me today.
Thank you, Maggie, for holding us in safe space.
You're very welcome. Thank you. So for that, I will say goodbye to our audience and thank you for joining us. And we will chat again at another time.